The Galactic Federation had ruled the stars for centuries, their fleets unmatched, their dominion unchallenged. To them, humanity was nothing more than an inconvenience, a young race that had dared to defy their authority. When Earth refused to surrender, the Federation decided to make an example out of them. A fleet of 10,000 warships was dispatched to crush the last remnants of human resistance. It was not a battle. It was an execution. General Xerval stood on the bridge of his command ship, a towering figure among his officers. His 6 crimson eyes narrowed as he observed the battlefield from the holographic display before him. The human fleet had already been shattered. Wreckage floated through the void, the remains of once proud vessels reduced to debris. Earth's defenses had collapsed, leaving only one last ship between them and total victory. A single vessel, drifting alone in the darkness. The HSS Revenant. Xerval sneered. The idea that one ship could stop his armada was beyond absurd. His officers laughed, their voices filled with confidence. They must be desperate, one of them chuckled. A lone ship against 10,000. The humans have finally lost their minds. But then, something happened that silenced the laughter. The Revenant moved. It was not the slow, desperate maneuver of a crippled warship. It was smooth, precise. Too precise. Without warning, the ship vanished from their sensors. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. The bridge of Xerval's flagship fell into stunned silence. Where did it go? Xerval demanded. His technicians scrambled to adjust their scanners, but there was nothing. No energy signature, no heat trail. The Revenant had simply disappeared. Panic began to creep into the voices of his officers. Impossible, one of them whispered. No ship can vanish like that. Xerval clenched his fists. This had to be some kind of trick. Fire at its last known location, he barked. His fleet obeyed. Thousands of plasma cannons opened fire, flooding the space where the Revenant had been with explosions. The void burned with energy, shockwaves rippling outward. But when the smoke cleared, the Revenant was still gone. Then the killing began. A Federation warship on the outer edge of the formation suddenly erupted in flames. It had been struck, but there had been no warning, no projectile, no beam of energy. The ship was simply there 1 second and destroyed the next. Another ship exploded, then another, and another. The battlefield descended into chaos. Federation captains shouted over the comms, demanding answers. Xerval's officers scrambled for explanations, but there were none. The Revenant was attacking, but no one could see it. No one could track it. The ship was a phantom, a ghost moving through the battlefield, striking with deadly precision. Xerval's breathing grew heavy. His mind raced through every possible scenario. Was this some new human weapon? A cloaking device? No, cloaked ships still left faint energy signatures. This was something else, something beyond their understanding. Recalibrate the sensors, he ordered. Find that ship. The scanners were adjusted, frequencies shifted, but it made no difference. The Revenant remained unseen. The Federation warships fired blindly, but their shots hit nothing but empty space. Meanwhile, the Revenant continued its assault. A group of destroyers attempted to form a defensive line, hoping to catch the invisible enemy in a crossfire. They never got the chance. The first ship in the formation was suddenly torn apart by an unseen force. A second followed, then a third. Within seconds, the entire line was gone. Fear spread like wildfire. "General, we have to retreat," one of his officers pleaded. Xerval slammed a fist against the console. "We are the Federation. We do not run from humans." But even as he spoke, he knew the battle was slipping away. More ships were falling, their captains unable to react before their vessels were destroyed. The Revenant was outnumbered 10,000 to 1, and yet it was winning. Xerval's mind raced. If this continued, his entire fleet could be wiped out. He needed to find a way to force the Revenant into the open. A trap. "All remaining ships, tighten formation," he commanded. "Create a net around the battlefield. If we can't see it, we'll make sure it has nowhere to run. The surviving Federation warships moved quickly, forming a massive sphere around the combat zone. Thousands of ships, positioned in perfect synchronization, their weapons aimed inward. It was a tactic that had crushed countless enemies before. No matter how fast or stealthy the Revenant was, it would have nowhere to go. For a moment, all was still. Then, the Revenant reappeared. It materialized in the center of the sphere, directly in front of the Federation's flagship. Surval's breath caught in his throat. The human ship was sleek, its hull black as the void, its surface shimmering with unknown energy. Its design was unlike anything the Federation had ever encountered. "Fire everything," Surval screamed. The fleet obeyed. Thousands of energy beams, missiles, and railgun rounds surged toward the Revenant. The space around the ship turned into a storm of destruction. The firepower unleashed in that moment was enough to level a planet. But as the smoke cleared, the Revenant remained untouched. A glowing barrier surrounded the ship, shimmering like liquid metal. The enemy fire had been absorbed, nullified as if it were nothing more than raindrops hitting a window. Surval's heart pounded. This was impossible. Then, for the first time, the Revenant responded. A deep, resonating voice echoed across the comms, a voice filled with cold certainty. "You should have sent more ships." Then the Revenant struck. It moved like a predator among prey, weaving through the Federation's formations with impossible speed. Its weapons roared to life, but they did not fire traditional energy blasts or missiles. Instead, thin beams of dark light lanced outward, piercing Federation warships as if they were made of paper. Wherever the beams touched, ships simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no wreckage, just empty space where they had once been. The sphere formation collapsed as panic overtook the fleet. Captains abandoned their posts, trying to flee. Some ships fired on their own allies in the chaos. The mighty Federation Armada, the greatest force in the galaxy, was unraveling. Surval could do nothing but watch. His fleet was dying. His men were screaming. And standing against them, untouched, unbroken, was one lone human ship, the Revenant. Surval had never known fear. He had led countless battles, crushed entire civilizations, and seen planets burn at his command. Yet, as he stood on the bridge of his flagship, his 6 crimson eyes locked onto the lone human vessel that was systematically annihilating his fleet, he felt something new. Dread. The Revenant was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It did not fight like a warship. It hunted like a predator. It struck and vanished, weaving through the battlefield like a ghost, its black hull absorbing the firepower of thousands. It had single-handedly turned a battle that should have been a massacre into a nightmare. The comm channels of the Federation fleet were in chaos. Captains shouted over one another, begging for orders, screaming in terror as their ships were erased from existence. Some attempted to flee, their warships breaking formation, but the Revenant was ruthless. It gave no quarter. The moment a ship attempted to retreat, it was destroyed. Surval gritted his teeth. He had never believed in legends, but this was something beyond reason. No technology in the galaxy should be capable of such devastation. The Revenant's weapons did not explode upon impact, nor did they tear through hulls like plasma beams. Instead, they erased ships from reality, as if they had never existed. His mind raced. He had 2 options: continue the fight and risk total annihilation, or find a way to escape and regroup. But if he fled now, his name would be forever tainted. The Federation did not tolerate weakness. If he abandoned this battle, the High Council would strip him of his rank, or worse, execute him for failure. He had to find a way to turn this fight around. "Status on our heavy warships," Surval barked. One of his officers, a trembling reptilian named Valakor, hesitated before answering. "General, we've lost over 4,000 vessels. Our dreadnoughts are holding their positions, but..." "Then we use them," Surval interrupted. His mind was already forming a plan. The Revenant was powerful, but it was still just one ship. If they could force it into a direct confrontation, perhaps they could overwhelm it. Order all remaining dreadnoughts to lock onto its position, Serval commanded. Charge the singularity cannons. We'll tear it apart with raw gravitational force. The singularity cannons were the Federation's most destructive weapons. They did not fire traditional energy blasts. Instead, they unleashed miniature black holes, capable of crushing entire cities into dust. If the Revenant could survive that, then it truly was invincible. The surviving dreadnoughts, massive warships the size of cities, moved into position. Their cannons hummed as they gathered the immense gravitational energy needed for a single devastating shot. Serval watched the display, his fingers curling into fists. The Revenant had reappeared near the wreckage of a destroyed Federation cruiser. It was still moving, still hunting, but now it had nowhere to run. Fire, Serval ordered. The void trembled. From the dreadnoughts, massive pulses of energy erupted, collapsing space itself as gravitational singularities formed. The battlefield warped as reality twisted under the pressure of the attacks. The Revenant was caught in the center, surrounded by unstoppable destruction. Serval allowed himself a grim smile. No matter how advanced the human ship was, no vessel could escape the pull of a black hole. The battle was over. But then something happened that turned his blood to ice. The singularities collapsed. They vanished as if they had never been created. The gravitational distortions that should have torn the Revenant apart simply disappeared, like smoke in the wind. The energy of the singularity cannons had been absorbed, nullified by something beyond understanding. Silence filled the bridge. Serval could hear the rapid breathing of his officers, the quiet, terrified whispers. This was not war. This was something else. The Revenant had just erased black holes from existence. A deep metallic voice suddenly echoed across all Federation channels, sending a cold shiver down Serval's spine. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was a statement. That was your best. And then the slaughter resumed. The Revenant moved with impossible speed, darting through the fleet like a shadow of death. The Federation's most powerful warships were torn apart in an instant. Some never even had the chance to fire. Serval watched in horror as a dreadnought, a vessel capable of leveling a planet, was sliced cleanly in half, its remains drifting into the void. He had lost. There was no question, no doubt. This was no longer a battle. It was extermination. Serval's breathing was ragged. His officers looked to him, waiting for orders, but he had none. His mind, once sharp and cunning, was clouded with a single thought: run. But even as the thought entered his mind, he knew escape was impossible. The Revenant did not allow survivors. No one who had faced it had lived to tell the tale. General, Valkor's voice was barely a whisper. What do we do? Serval stared at the holographic display, watching his fleet die. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. He had fought countless wars, but against this, there was nothing left to do. He closed his eyes. And then, for the first time in centuries, the great General Serval did something he had never done before. He prayed. Serval had always believed in strength. The Federation had conquered the galaxy with overwhelming force, and for centuries he had been at the heart of that power. He had watched empires fall before him, had heard the desperate pleas of defeated enemies. Yet now, as his mighty fleet was being erased by a single human ship, he understood what true fear was. The Revenant moved like a phantom, a wraith among the stars, and the Federation's weapons were useless against it. Every attempt to stop it had failed. Plasma cannons, railguns, singularity weapons, none had even scratched its hull. The fleet that was meant to crush Earth was being torn apart with cold precision. Serval's mind raced. If he did nothing, his entire force would be gone within minutes. His name, his legacy, his very existence, erased like all the ships before him. He had only one option left. A desperate, reckless move. Open a direct channel to the Revenant. he ordered, his voice hoarse. His officers exchanged uneasy glances. No one had dared to speak to the human ship. No surrender had been offered, no negotiations attempted. But they obeyed. The channel opened. For a long moment, there was silence. Then a voice spoke, a deep, mechanical voice, laced with something far worse than anger. Disinterest. You should not have come here. Serval forced himself to remain calm. I am General Serval of the Galactic Federation. This battle is meaningless. There is no need for further slaughter. There was no immediate response. The Revenant remained still, hovering in the debris field of the destroyed Federation ships. Then the voice returned, as cold as the void itself. You came to exterminate humanity. Now you beg for mercy. Serval's mandibles clenched. He had never begged for anything. He had conquered worlds, crushed rebellions, stood unshaken against armies. But this was something beyond him. This war does not need to continue, he said carefully. You are clearly more advanced than we expected. I am willing to discuss terms. Another silence. Then, quiet laughter. It was the first true emotion Serval had heard from the Revenant's pilot. A low, humorless sound, filled with something worse than mockery. Certainty. You don't understand, the voice said. There are no terms. There is no war. There is only the lesson. Serval felt his stomach drop. Lesson. The Revenant moved. Faster than anything should have been able to. It surged forward, closing the distance between itself and Serval's flagship in an instant. Alarms screamed across the bridge as officers scrambled to react. But it was too late. The human ship hovered just outside their hull, its dark form casting a shadow over the massive warship. Then, Serval's monitors flickered. The holographic displays around him were hijacked. His own systems, the most secure in the Federation, were now under the control of the Revenant. The screens filled with images, not of the battle, not of the Federation's ships burning in the void, but of Earth. Serval's six eyes widened as he saw footage of humanity, not in war, but in history, the great conflicts of their past, the wars they had fought among themselves before reaching the stars. He saw their world scared by nuclear fire, their cities turned to rubble. He saw trenches filled with bodies, heard the distant echoes of ancient battles, and yet they had survived. They had rebuilt. Again and again, humanity had faced extinction, only to rise stronger. Their own species had tried to wipe itself out countless times, and still they endured. The images changed. Now he saw alien ships, not Federation vessels, but others, older, the ruins of civilizations long forgotten, races that had once ruled the stars before vanishing into nothingness. Then the final image, a single phrase burned into the surface of a broken moon. We tried to conquer them. We were the first. We were the last. Serval felt his breath catch. This had happened before. The Revenant's voice returned, quiet now, almost regretful. We were never the weak ones. You should have learned from history, but you didn't. Serval's hands trembled. His officers stared at him, waiting for orders, but there were none left to give. The Federation had believed themselves to be gods among the stars. They had been wrong. You asked if there could be peace, the Revenant said. That time is gone. The only thing left is the reckoning. Serval's screen flickered again. A single countdown appeared. 10 seconds. His blood ran cold. What have you done? The Revenant did not answer. The countdown reached 0. And the Federation fleet began to die. One by one, their ships shut down. Their power cores overloaded, their shields collapsed. It was not a violent explosion. It was worse. It was erasure. Where once there had been an armada of 10,000, now there was nothing but empty space. The warships were gone, as if they had never existed. Serval's flagship remained, alone, adrift in the silence. Serval sat frozen, His fleet was gone. He turned slowly to face the Revenant. "You." His voice was barely a whisper. "What are you?" The Revenant hovered in silence for a long moment. Then, at last, the voice spoke one final time. The last warning. And then it was gone. Xerval could only watch as the human ship disappeared into the void, leaving him alone in the wreckage of his own failure. Xerval sat in silence, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Moments ago, his fleet had been one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. 10,000 warships, each one capable of annihilating entire civilizations. And now, gone. The Revenant had not simply destroyed them, it had erased them. No wreckage, no bodies, no trace of their existence remained. The fleet that had once cast its shadow over Earth had been turned into nothing but empty space. His 6 crimson eyes darted to the holographic display, searching for any sign of survivors, any distress signals. But there was nothing. Just his ship, floating alone in the void. For the first time in his long career, Xerval felt truly powerless. A sharp, trembling breath escaped him. He was a general of the Galactic Federation. He had fought in wars across the stars. He had conquered entire systems. And yet, against one human ship, he had been reduced to nothing. The bridge was silent. His officers, those who had not been on ships that had vanished, stood frozen, their faces pale with shock. None of them spoke. None of them could. Xerval's claws dug into his armrest as he forced himself to stand. "We need to return to Federation space," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. No one answered at first. Then Valcor, his most trusted officer, swallowed hard and nodded. "General, our hyperdrives are operational. We can leave at your command." Xerval nodded. "Set a course. Maximum speed." The ship lurched forward, tearing through space. As it escaped the battlefield, it was no longer a battlefield. There was no enemy left to fight. There was no war left to win. As the stars blurred past the viewport, Xerval sat back down, his thoughts spiraling. How had this happened? The Federation had analyzed humanity, studied their technology, their weapons. Nothing in their reports had prepared them for this. The Revenant should not have existed, and yet it did. Xerval's claws tapped against the metal of his command chair. His mind replayed the images the Revenant had shown him, the ruins of past empires, the warnings left behind. We tried to conquer them. We were the first. We were the last. Was it true? Had others tried before them? Had humanity faced extinction before and survived? The thought unsettled him. More than anything, though, one truth clawed at his mind. If humanity possessed such power, why had they not used it before? Why had they allowed the Federation to think them weak? The answer was terrifying. They had never needed to. Until now. Valcor approached him cautiously. "General, what do we tell the High Council?" Xerval exhaled slowly. What could he tell them? That a single human warship had wiped out the greatest armada in history. That all their intelligence reports had been wrong. That they had provoked a species that had been holding back their true strength. The Federation would not accept it. They would refuse to believe him. Unless... Xerval's eyes narrowed. He could lie. He could claim the battle had been lost due to a strategic failure, that the enemy had lured them into a trap, that humanity had been more resilient than expected, but not invincible. He could save face, maintain his position, and convince the High Council that another war could still be won. Or he could tell the truth and warn them. His mandibles clenched. The Federation did not tolerate failure. If he admitted the full truth, they might execute him. But if they ignored the danger and launched another war, the entire Federation could suffer the same fate as his fleet. Humanity had shown restraint. But if the Federation forced their hand again, the next war would not be a battle. It would be an extinction. Xerval looked at Valcor. "Prepare a transmission to the High Council," he said. Valcor hesitated. "What should we tell them, General?" Xerval's eyes darkened. "The truth. Exhilarating stood rigid in the High Council's chamber, his back straight, his claws clasped behind him. The air in the massive hall was thick with tension. The 12 councilors sat in their grand thrones, each one an elder of the Federation, their expressions carved from stone. These were the rulers of the galaxy, the architects of conquest, the ones who decided which civilizations would be allowed to exist and which would be erased. He had served them for centuries. He had won wars in their name. And now, they looked at him as if he were an insect. Councillor Varric, the eldest among them, leaned forward. His deep blue eyes bored into Exhilarating. "Are you telling us," he said slowly, "that your fleet of 10,000 warships was defeated by one human vessel?" Exhilarating's mandibles twitched. Destroyed. Not defeated. Erased. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some of the councilors exchanged uneasy glances, but others remained cold, unimpressed. Varric's claws tapped against the stone table. "And you expect us to believe this?" Exhilarating's fists clenched. He had expected resistance, but to see them so unmoved by the truth, by the threat, boiled his blood. "I watched it happen," he said, his voice tightening. "My fleet was the most advanced force in the galaxy. Our weapons were the pinnacle of Federation engineering. And yet, nothing worked. The Revenant's defenses were impenetrable. Our ships disappeared without a trace. Our technology, our very understanding of warfare, was useless against them." Varric scoffed. "You were outmaneuvered by an enemy more clever than you. That does not make them invincible." Exhilarating's claws scraped against the table. This was not strategy. It was something beyond our comprehension. The Revenant didn't fight us. It ended us. Councillor Gilza, a hulking reptilian, sneered. "Then why are you still alive? If this Revenant is as powerful as you claim, why did it let you go?" Exhilarating hesitated. He had asked himself the same question 100 times since the battle. "The Revenant gave us a warning," he said at last. "A lesson. It wanted us to understand. Humanity was never weak. They allowed us to think so. But now that we have forced their hand, we may not get another chance to back away." Silence. Then laughter. Exhilarating's chest tightened as some of the councilors chuckled, their voices full of amusement and mockery. Varric shook his head. "You come before us, asking us to fear these primitives. You, one of our greatest generals, returned from battle, not as a warrior, but as a messenger of fear." His voice hardened. "I should have you executed for cowardice." Exhilarating's vision blurred with rage. "You call it cowardice? It is survival. If we continue this war, we will not win. We will not even fight. We will be eradicated." Varric's face twisted into a sneer. "You are afraid, General. That is all I see before me. A soldier who lost his nerve." Exhilarating felt his claws tremble. How could they not see it? How could they not understand? He had never known fear before. He had crushed worlds beneath his feet. But against the Revenant, he had been nothing. And these fools, these arrogant old fools, still thought they held power over the stars. Varric leaned back. "The Federation will not bow to a single human ship. We will rebuild our fleet, and this time, we will annihilate them properly. You will lead this war, General." His eyes gleamed with cruelty. "And this time, do not return in disgrace." Exhilarating's breath hitched. He had come here to warn them. And they had just signed their own death sentence. His voice was low, shaking with fury. "If you go to war again, you will not get another chance to regret it." Varric smirked. "Dismissed, General." Exhilarating's hands curled into fists as he turned and stormed out of the chamber. They wouldn't listen. They would never listen. And because of that, the Federation was doomed. Exhilarating stood at the edge of the observation deck, staring out into the abyss of space. The stars stretched endlessly before him, but for the first time in his life, they felt empty, meaningless. The High Council had made its decision. They would rebuild. They would launch a second attack. and they had ordered him, to lead it. The rage inside him had not faded since the moment he had walked out of that cursed chamber. It burned, raw and unrelenting. Not just because of their arrogance, but because he had seen the truth and they had laughed at it. 10,000 warships had vanished, a force greater than any other in history, gone. And yet, these fools still believed they could win. Serval exhaled sharply. He had served the Federation for centuries. He had bled for them, conquered in their name, watched countless civilizations crumble under his fleet's might. But for the first time, he questioned everything. His communicator buzzed. He knew who it was before even looking. Valcor. He pressed the button. Speak. General. It's happening. Serval turned sharply. What? Valcor's voice was tense. The humans. They responded. A chill ran down Serval's spine. How? See for yourself, Valcor said grimly. You need to come to the bridge. Now. Serval didn't hesitate. When he stepped onto the bridge, every officer was deathly silent. Their eyes were locked onto the massive central display. His own breath caught as he saw what had shaken them. A transmission. Not a message, not a warning. A declaration. The screen flickered to life. A human stood before them. Not a warrior, not a soldier in armor, but a man dressed in an Earth military uniform. His expression was cold, his eyes unreadable. And yet there was something about him. A presence that made even the most battle-hardened officers uneasy. Then he spoke. The Galactic Federation, the human said, his voice calm, level. You were given a chance to walk away. Serval felt his claws tighten. You did not take it. The human's expression did not change, but something in his eyes darkened. Your first fleet came for war. We answered. His voice remained steady, but there was an unshakable weight behind it. Now you are preparing another invasion. You believe that because we did not destroy your entire species, we are weak. You believe that because you still exist, you are safe. A pause. You are mistaken. The bridge was silent. The human leaned forward slightly. There will be no third warning. The screen cut to black. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The silence pressed down like a crushing force. Then an alarm blared. General. One of the officers turned, his voice trembling. We're detecting something massive. Serval whipped around. Show me. The display shifted. The moment he saw the readings, his blood ran cold. A fleet. No, not a fleet. A storm. Hundreds. No, thousands of signatures, each one larger than any warship the Federation had ever built. The human fleet had arrived, and they had brought hell with them. Serval stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the massive display before him. Thousands of human warships appeared on their sensors, each one powerful, each one unlike anything the Federation had ever seen. But none of them mattered, not really. Because at the center of it all, the Revenant had returned. The bridge crew was deathly silent. Officers who had survived the first battle, the ones who had witnessed the impossible, looked pale, their eyes wide with barely restrained terror. General. Valcor's voice was unsteady. What do we do? Serval didn't answer. His mind raced. His instincts screamed. He had fought countless wars, had crushed entire civilizations beneath his fleet's might. But now he understood something horrifying. This was not a war. It never had been. The Federation had started this, thinking it would be another conquest, another species to dominate, another easy victory. But the humans, they had never been prey. And now, the apex predator had arrived. General, one of the officers shouted, we're receiving a direct transmission from the Revenant. Serval exhaled shakily. Put it through. The screen flickered. Once again, the human commander stood before them. The same calm expression. The same piercing gaze. "You were warned," the human said. Zerval's throat went dry. "You were given a choice," the human continued. "We could have ended this after your first fleet, but instead of walking away, you chose war." A pause. "And now we will show you what that really means." The transmission cut. Alarms blared. "Incoming fire." An officer screamed. "It's..." The bridge shook. Zerval stumbled, barely catching himself on the command console. A second impact followed. Then a third. A dozen. 100. Shields failing. Someone shouted, "We!" A deafening explosion rocked the ship. Sparks rained from the ceiling, the lights flickering as systems failed. Zerval pulled himself upright, his heart pounding. He turned to the display, his claws gripping the edge of the console. And then he saw it. The Federation's entire fleet was vanishing. Not in a long, drawn-out battle, not in a war of attrition. It was annihilation. The Revenant moved like a phantom, weaving through enemy ships with impossible speed. Beams of energy sliced through Federation warships like paper. Missiles twisted in the air, striking with unerring precision. No matter what the Federation fired, nothing hit the Revenant. It danced between attacks, as if it knew where the enemy would fire before they even did. A single human ship, destroying thousands. Zerval's mind refused to process what he was seeing. This was beyond technology, beyond strategy. This was absolute dominance. More explosions rocked the ship. Officers screamed. Fires spread. The battle was already over. No, it had never even been a battle. It was an execution. "General." Valcor turned to him, desperation in his eyes. "We have to abandon ship. The fleet is static." Zerval turned. Valcor was gone. So was half the bridge crew. One moment, they had been there. The next, a beam of light had sliced through the ship, through metal, through bodies. Zerval felt something deep inside him shatter. There was no Federation anymore. No war. No victory. There was only humanity's wrath. He stumbled back, his breathing ragged, his vision blurring. The last thing he saw was the Revenant, cutting through the Federation's once great fleet, as if it were nothing. And then the void swallowed him whole. The war was over, and the galaxy would never forget.